When Pastor Angela entered my home that still afternoon, I had no idea her visit would unravel everything I believed about boundaries, desire, and control. Her once soothing, motherly presence began to stir something deeper, something forbidden inside me. What followed was a moment that would alter us both forever, so intense that we knew there was no turning back. It was one of those quiet afternoons where everything feels slow, almost frozen in time. The house was bathed in a soft golden light, and I was lounging in the living room, my mind wandering aimlessly. My parents had mentioned earlier that Pastor Angela would be stopping by to check on us, something she occasionally did. But this visit felt different. Pastor Angela, though older, carried herself with grace and warmth, qualities that naturally drew people to her. She had a calm and composed manner, with a voice that was both soft and authoritative, making you hang on her every word. I always found myself captivated by her, though I didn't fully understand why until today. When the doorbell rang, a flutter of excitement ran through me. I opened the door to find Pastor Angela standing there, her silver hair neatly tied back, her eyes kind and filled with understanding. She wore a modest dress, appropriate for her age and role, but there was an undeniable elegance in the way she presented herself. Good afternoon, she greeted me warmly, her voice gentle yet commanding. Is your family home? I shook my head, explaining that my parents had just gone out but would return soon. Would you like to come in and wait? I asked. She nodded, and I led her inside. As soon as she stepped into the living room, the atmosphere seemed to shift, becoming smaller and more intimate. We sat facing each other, exchanging small talk about the church, her recent sermons, and how she had been keeping busy. But there was an underlying tension, something unspoken in the air. After a pause in the conversation, she looked at me with those calm, knowing eyes and asked, "How are you?" Really, her tone suggested a concern deeper than casual interest. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. It wasn't often that someone inquired about my feelings, especially in the way she did. "I've been fine, I guess," I replied, my voice trailing off, unsure if I should reveal more. She leaned in slightly, her gaze locked on mine. "Fine isn't the same as good," she said softly. "You seem like you've been carrying something heavy. Do you want to talk about it?" Her words were like a gentle nudge, as if she already knew something I hadn't admitted to myself. A tightness gripped my chest as emotions I had buried began to surface. I don't know," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I feel stuck, like something's missing, but I can't figure out what." Pastor Angela nodded, her expression full of empathy. "Sometimes we hide parts of ourselves, even from ourselves. It's hard to face what's really inside," she said softly, pausing before continuing, "but you don't have to face it alone." Her words hung in the air, and before I knew it, a tear had slipped down my cheek. She gently reached out, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was soft, comforting, and I instinctively leaned into it. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're all searching for something. Sometimes it's connection, sometimes it's love." The way she said the word love made my heart skip a beat. There was a weight to it, a depth I hadn't expected. I looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted between us. Her presence, once comforting, now felt different, more intimate. Her hand remained on mine, her thumb gently stroking my skin, and I could feel my pulse quickening. The room seemed to grow warmer, the air heavier. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, or if something had truly changed, but I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me toward her. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "we find love in the most unexpected places." The look in her eyes now was unmistakable, something beyond simple concern, as if she could see right through me, see the desires I hadn't even admitted to myself. My heart raced, my thoughts in a whirlwind, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. There was something about her, something that made resistance impossible. She leaned in slowly, her face just inches from mine. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment time stood still. Her lips hovered near mine, close enough that I could feel her warm breath, but she didn't close the gap just yet. It was a moment frozen in time, heavy with tension and unspoken desire. Then, ever so gently, she pressed her lips to mine. It was a soft, tentative kiss, but it sent a surge of electricity through me. I hadn't anticipated this, hadn't even realized I wanted it, but now that it was happening, I couldn't imagine stopping. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching mine for any hesitation. But I didn't want her to stop. I didn't want to be anywhere but in this moment with her. I reached out, resting my hand softly on her cheek, and she leaned into my touch. There was something tender in the way she gazed at me, making me feel both safe and excited in a way I hadn't before. Our kisses grew deeper, more urgent, as the tension between us finally broke free. Her hands found my shoulders, then slid down my arms, her touch sending shivers through me. I had never experienced anything like this before, never felt such an overwhelming desire for someone. As we continued kissing, the world outside faded away. There was no one else, nothing else, just the two of us, lost in the moment. Time seemed to blur, each kiss blending into the next, each touch leaving me wanting more. Pastor Angela's hands moved to my chest, her fingers tracing light patterns on my skin. I could feel the heat rising between us, her growing desire matching my own. Yet, despite the passion, there was a gentleness in her touch, as though she was leading me through something both forbidden and sacred. Her lips found my neck, planting soft kisses along my jawline, and I gasped at the sensation. My body was on fire, every nerve alive with anticipation. I wanted more, needed more, but the way she lingered, savoring each second, made the experience even more intense. She pulled back slightly, locking eyes with me once again. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern but also something deeper. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain what I was feeling. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. She smiled a soft, knowing smile, then kissed me again. This time it was slower, more deliberate, as if she was cherishing every moment. The intensity built gradually, the tension between us growing with each kiss, each touch. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and still she didn't rush. She was in no hurry, content to stretch out the moment, letting the anticipation grow. It was both maddening and exhilarating, this slow burn of desire consuming us both. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, she pulled me closer. Her body pressed against mine, and my heart raced. There was no denying it now, this was more than just a kiss, more than a fleeting moment of passion. It was something deeper, something neither of us had expected but both of us needed. Her hands slid down my back, and I felt the warmth radiating from her skin. I pressed my lips to hers again, this time with more urgency, more need. She responded in kind, our bodies moving together in perfect sync. Each kiss, each touch, drove us further into the depths of desire. We were both lost now, lost in the moment and in each other. It felt like nothing else mattered, like the outside world didn't exist. All that mattered was this connection, this overwhelming need to be closer to her, to feel her, to know her in a way I had never known anyone before. She pulled back slightly, her breath heavy, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her voice tinged with regret, but also longing. "But I can't stop." Neither could I, and so we continued, our movements slow and deliberate, drawing out the moment for as long as we could. Time lost all meaning as we gave in to the pull between us, the passion that had been simmering beneath the surface finally finding its release. Even in the height of our passion, there was tenderness, a sense that this was about more than just physical desire. There was a connection between us, something deep and unspoken that went beyond mere attraction. As the afternoon wore on and the sun dipped lower in the sky, we finally pulled away from each other, but the intensity between us didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, more palpable. The air in the room felt thick with tension, a kind that made my skin tingle with anticipation. Pastor Angela's eyes, once so calm and composed, now held a fire I had never seen before. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, more raw, more real. She exhaled slowly, her breath shaky as she gazed at me, her eyes lingering on my lips, as if contemplating something forbidden. We shouldn't," she murmured again, but her voice lacked the conviction it might have had earlier. I leaned in, my lips just brushing hers, my voice barely a whisper. "But we want to," I said, the truth hanging in the air like a secret only we could understand. A part of me knew this was wrong, knew we were crossing boundaries we could never come back from. But the need, the desire, was undeniable. This time she didn't pull away. Her hands, warm and slightly trembling, cupped my face gently, as if afraid I might vanish if she wasn't careful. Her touch was intimate, tender, and it took my breath away. There was something unspoken in her eyes, something I couldn't quite decipher but felt deeply a mixture of guilt, longing, and surrender. And then, as if the decision had already been made, she kissed me again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Her lips were hungry, needy, as if every moment leading up to this had been building to this one. I could feel the intensity in her kiss, the way she pressed her body closer to mine, her hands tangling in my hair as she deepened the kiss. I responded with equal urgency, my hands finding her waist and pulling her closer, as if the space between us was unbearable. There was no more doubt, no more second-guessing. We were both completely lost in the moment, consumed by the heat between us. Her hands slid down my chest, slow but deliberate, her touch sending shivers through me. She leaned in closer, her breath hot against my ear as she whispered, "Do you know how long I've been fighting this?" Her words made my heart race, my mind spinning with the realization that this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment impulse for her. It had been building, simmering beneath the surface far longer than I had known. I didn't know, I admitted, my voice shaky under the weight of the situation. She pulled back just enough to meet my gaze, her fingers tracing along my jawline as she studied my face, her eyes dark with desire. "I've thought about this," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "About you, about us. But I always told myself it was wrong, that I couldn't. But being here with you," her words trailed off as her eyes fell to my lips again, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't hold back any longer. I kissed her again, this time with more force, my hands sliding over her back as I pulled her closer. I didn't just want her, I needed her, in a way I hadn't realized until this very moment. Every kiss, every touch, was like adding fuel to the fire burning between us, growing hotter and more intense with each passing second. Pastor Angela responded with the same fervor, her hands moving down my back, pulling me tighter against her. There was something urgent in the way we kissed, as if we both understood we had crossed a boundary and were now plunging headfirst into the unknown. She gently pushed me onto the couch, her body hovering over mine as she gazed down at me. Her eyes were a mix of desire and something else, fear or maybe regret, but the feeling was brief, quickly replaced by an undeniable passion we couldn't ignore. Her hands moved to my shirt, her fingers trembling slightly as she fumbled with the buttons. I could feel her hesitation, the way her hands shook, but it only heightened the intensity of the moment. She wanted this as much as I did, but the weight of it, the consequences, hung over us like a shadow. "Are you sure?" I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper, as I looked up at her. I needed to know, needed to hear her say it, because once we took this step, there would be no turning back. She paused for a moment, her eyes locking with mine as she took a deep breath. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, she leaned down and kissed me again, this time harder, more determined. Her hands finished undoing my shirt, sliding it off my shoulders, and I could feel the heat radiating from her body. Soon her own clothes followed, and there was nothing between us but the warmth of our skin and the undeniable pull of desire that had been building for so long. Every touch, every kiss, became more intense than the one before, the air thick with the scent of passion and the sound of our ragged breathing. She guided my hands to her body, her touch firm yet gentle, and I could feel her tremble beneath my fingers, her breath hitching every time I touched her just right. It was intoxicating, the power we seemed to have over each other, the overwhelming connection neither of us could resist. The world outside faded as we lost ourselves in one another, each moment more consuming than the last. There was no room for doubt, no space for second thoughts. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, this overpowering desire that had taken hold of us and wouldn't let go. As the sun began to set, casting the room in a soft, golden light, we surrendered completely to the passion that had been simmering between us for so long. Time lost all meaning, and for those precious moments, nothing existed but the two of us, intertwined in a dance of desire and longing neither of us wanted to end. But even as we gave in to the passion, there was something more, something deeper, something that told me this wasn't just a fleeting moment of lust. It was something that had been growing between us for far longer than we had realized. As we lay there, our bodies entwined, the weight of what we had done began to settle in. The passion, the intensity was undeniable, but so was the reality of what came next. Lying there in the stillness, our bodies still tangled together, the gravity of our actions pressed down on us. Pastor Angela's breathing was heavy, her fingers lightly tracing my skin, as if she, too, was struggling to process the reality of what had just happened. The intimacy between us was undeniable, but so was the forbidden nature of it. The room, once filled with the heat of passion, now felt heavier, weighed down by the silent acknowledgement that we had crossed a line we could never uncross. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the same conflict swirling inside me, the pull of desire warring with the guilt threatening to consume us. Yet, even with that understanding lingering between us, there was no regret in her touch as she leaned in, her lips brushing mine one final time, slow and tender, but charged with the intensity of everything we had shared. Her voice, soft and breathless, broke the silence. "We can't go back," she whispered, her words heavy with the finality of our actions. And though we both understood the cost of what we had done, there was an unspoken agreement in the way she held me. This moment, this forbidden connection, was something neither of us could ever truly walk away from. The intensity of what we had shared would linger, haunting us long after the heat of the moment had passed, a reminder of the passion we had surrendered to, even knowing it could never last. When Pastor Angela stepped into my home that quiet afternoon, I had never imagined the visit would unravel everything I thought I knew about boundaries, desire, and control. Her presence, once calming and maternal, began to stir something deeper within me, something forbidden. As our conversations grew more intimate, so did the unspoken tension simmering just beneath the surface. One touch, one kiss, and the line between right and wrong blurred into something neither of us could resist. What followed was a moment that would change us both forever, something so powerful that we knew there would be no going back.